You're listening to the Persistence Mastery Podcast to give your communication skills the clarity edge with your host, Paul Leon.
Hey guys, welcome back. So we're going to cover a question I get a lot. And a question I get a lot, especially when I'm facilitating sales training, consultations, or coaching someone on best practices and consultative selling skills is, hey, how many times do I ask for the sale and how much is too much? This is a question that comes up pretty frequently. And I do want to kind of dispel some myths around this question. When it comes to how many times you should ask, it really can depend on a few things. We have to first define on what a sale is and via what asking for the sale means. Asking for the sale is a commitment. That's what it is, plain and simple. And when we ask someone, are you ready to move forward? Or are you ready to buy? Whatever your vernacular is, I do think words matter. And I have an episode on that you should reference earlier episodes of my podcast. But we have to define this simply by saying, well, asking for the sale is a commitment. So the question of how many times do I ask for the sale? If you look at spin selling, they'll say anytime more than 2 to 3 times can start to irritate a customer. And that's a good reference point. I recommend that book. But in my experience, being the top 10% in sales in Fortune 100 companies and doing thousands and thousands of consultations, I'm going to be honest with you. It really doesn't matter how many times you ask for the sale. It matters more is how many commitments you gained from the customer earlier in your consultation. See, this is a big pain point for a lot of people new to sales. They think that they have to get someone to buy. That's not the case. You have to get someone to realize and uncover their own needs. And I was in a training, even with some pretty high professionals once, and they said, this is kind of cliche, but we don't like to say it, but it's true. Bring out the pain. And that's not necessarily a bad thing if you're asking questions and there is some pain that comes up in the conversation. That's not necessarily a bad thing. The reason we want the customer to get there on their own through our own questions and just listening to them is because the more the customer talks, the more organic commitments they're going to make on their own when it gets into the time to ask for the order or move forward. Now, a lot of the consultations I've done in my early days of getting into sales and kind of learning how to create clarity and communication skills, I used to do all those fancy closing techniques like the Ben Franklin close, where you write down the center of a paper and you do a comparison. And I'm not against any of those closing techniques. I think they taught me a lot in the beginning. But the big mistake I made was I focused too much on closing and not enough quality questions, listening, and conversation. So, again, when it comes to how many times do I ask for the sale, the reality is it really doesn't matter. It matters more that did you ask enough questions early? Did you let the customer conversate enough to create their own commitments so that when you do ask for the sale, it's not a big pain point and it isn't uncomfortable? And here's the reality. A lot of statistics show, especially from the spin selling reference that I use quite a bit in my research, is that not asking for the sale, though, can hurt you. You do have to ask for it. I'm not saying, and I don't want to misconstrue the message in this podcast episode. I am not saying do not ask for the sale, just ask questions and be buddy buddy with the opportunity you're working with. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is the commitment of asking for the sale becomes more strong, contingent on how many commitments you gained earlier in the consultative process, from getting the opportunity or lead, or booking the appointment without giving a price, or did you ask enough open-ended questions, and did you ask good quality open-ended questions to allow the customer to get there on their own? And unfortunately, I think if you're listening to this, your pain point isn't that you can't ask for the sale. I'm confident anybody new in sales, etc., is probably very good at asking for the sale. The challenge that you may have, and then a lot of people who get into sales is they don't allow the customer to keep talking. They don't allow the customer to conversate, and they don't have a framework of open-ended questions to allow the customer to talk in a certain way to where they can get there on their own. And then once you have multiple commitments from the customer, asking it open-ended questions, at not giving the price when booking the appointment, but using what we call a sales value proposition, then and only then, when you're doing all those things effectively, that you can ask for the sale and then possibly close that opportunity. Because here's the thing, no matter how many books you read, no matter how many podcasts you listen to, including this one or any podcast on sales or communication skills, there's always going to be a losing variable or failure factor within the consultative process. And the biggest thing I will tell you is don't get caught up on how many times to ask for the sale in your consultations. Get caught up with, well, how many times did I help this opportunity conversate and navigate the consultation to where they could discuss their own needs and create their own commitments, so that when you do get to that point of asking for the order, it's significantly easier and it's really not a challenge at all.
Thank you for listening to the Persistence Mastery Podcast. Subscribe to where you listen to podcasts. And if you want to hire Paul to train or speak for your team, visit persistencemastery.com and fill out the request training form.